How's it going, YouTube? Coming to you today with another video, and today, guys, what to bring to you is the Marincess Complete Guide. I'm very excited about this video. This is a deck that I really enjoy. It's a lot of fun. I'm here with Eva. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the channel.
Hey y'all, I'm Eva Lees. You can find me on Twitter as at EVA_LEES, and I also stream on Twitch, and I absolutely adore this deck.
This is definitely something that I wanted to do, and inviting Eva to the channel for this deck in particular. I really enjoy this deck. I know that Eva does too, and being able to showcase something that isn't Sprite or tiered right now, I think is really important because there are a lot of very important decks out there that we can play, especially ones that are budget that can still do very well. The entire Marincess deck, for the most part, just got reprinted in the new Legendary Ocean set. And this is something that, again, if you are getting into the game and you really need something to play that's really strong, it's a little bit complicated at times because there's a lot of different play lines you got to pay attention to. But at the same point, we're going to break that down for you today. If you do want to pick up the deck, this is a really valid option for you this format.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a deck that I've grown to love from having an experience of getting COVID and then basically just doing nothing but playing this deck for about a week to learn everything I could about it. And you just kind of form a bond at that point.
Yeah, and that's something where I've been playing Striker for a long time, and then I found Tier, and now that I have like two different decks that I play, I'm like, is there another deck out there that I can play for like locals or like online tournaments or just something that's a little different? And so that's when I found Marincess myself, and I think that's really cool too. So I'm excited to bring you this deck, and I'm excited to explain to you exactly what the deck does so you can give it a shot yourself. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over at Imperium Duelist, Dragon Shield, or Gem, definitely go down in the description below, check them all out, and without further ado, let's hop running into the first slide. So the first thing I want to talk about is going to be talking about our starters. Now, how important would you say Blue Tang is to the deck, especially when the first iteration of the deck only had Seahorse?
My gosh. I mean, Blue Tang is kind of everything to this deck. You can still make your combos and you can still go through lines of play without her, but she is just so much for this deck. She is your one card best combo. She is a card that when she's Link summoned, she has a Salmon Great Foxy effect to look at the top three and add one to your hand. She foolishes, she's a level 4. I mean, just the perfect starter for this deck. It's kind of the classic cyber syndrome of you have your perfect one card starter. Um, and as with Seahorse, before it was basically just when the deck came out, you would just go through your Seahorse line and you'd be able to end on Marble Rock Pass, basically, if you just had her. And the deck has evolved so much since then. Um, to this place that is entirely interesting. And yeah, they're both great cards and both easy 3 ofs in the deck.
No, I know as soon as we got the Legendary Ocean set that there was a lot of really key pieces that got added to the deck so that it was actually a lot more competitive. But at the same point, I think that it's really important to note as well that there are a lot of different key pieces in the deck that we're going to be covering today because of the fact that there's so many pieces of extension. There's a lot of really nice utility and also the amount of utility spots in the deck alone to be able to run that many different hand traps, the fact that Blue Tang can add cards like Wave. There's a lot of really cool interactions in this deck that I like a lot. Having Marincess Blue Tang in the deck is definitely something that the deck needed. It's kind of like when Subterra got Guru. It's just that one monster that really can change the tide of the deck. And I think that's really cool too, because I remember back when the deck was on its first iteration, was just Seahorse, and I don't really feel like the deck did a whole lot that had the whole thing where you just played the deck to lose to Nibiru, where now you don't really have to deal with that. So I think that there's a lot of really cool tech cards and a lot of really cool iterations that were done with the deck, and I'm excited to be going into this further. And what I mean by that too is that the whole line of play was really just going like into Seahorse, into Blue Slug, into the Anemone, and like that was all fine. But now we have the availability to go into Tang, go into Sea Angel, and I feel like that is just so much better because with Sea Angel now we can add cards like Dive. Now, how important do you think Dive was when that card got announced?
Dive was such an important addition to the deck because it was so often that this is a problem that Marincess still has somewhat in terms of uh, like if your normal summon gets stopped, what do you do from there? But dive was so important for the deck because if your normal summon got popped or anything of the sort, or now having Forbidden Droplet, if you send Marincess monsters off of Droplet, then you can revive a monster and not have to use your normal summon. So it's such a huge card for the deck, and when you had Sea Angel before, all she was doing was adding Battle Ocean. And having Dive now, it makes it so that, oh, I drew Battle Ocean? Sweet. I'm just gonna search Dive. I'm gonna special summon from the deck. Let's go. So it completely changed so many things, and it made the deck so much easier to combo with.
Yeah, I completely agree. And having the line for Sea Angel too, it just feels a lot better to be able to go into something that also it doesn't come up a whole lot, but doesn't automatically lock you into water. So you at least have some kind of different option as well. Blue Slug it does lock you into water immediately. The same thing as Dive. So these are things you got to keep in mind whenever you're playing the deck, and that's why you usually only see the extra deck just full of water monsters because there's not a whole lot of different options out there as far as like what you can do. But it's still something that's really nice to note that you're not automatically locked. So if there ever is another line coming up later on, that you can at least do something first and then go about your combo with Marincess. So I think that's really cool too.
Absolutely.
So going on into what our end board typically wants to look like. So we have two different options as far as your link fours that you want to go into. One being that Argonaut, the other one being the Bubble Reef. Bubble Reef is a pseudo Deco Talker Heatzel. And so the other one, Argonaut, is really nice. This one allows you to go ahead and negate a spell or a trap. This card has actually just been really impactful as well. It gets really big with Battle Ocean, and I feel like a lot of times it's pretty hard to out. How do you feel this card really impacted the deck as well?
It was such a huge addition to it because before Argonaut came out, you would have, back row, you can have whatever you would want. You would have Goes and Match, you'd have, your Battle Ocean, you'd have all of your Link monsters attached to it. And then someone would just Duster, Lightning Storm, Twin Twisters, do whatever, go into evenly matched as well. And that was the end of the game. And having this card is so much better to be able to have that in archetype out to these cards. And its ability to be able to special summon the Marincess that's attached to it is just fantastic because it also gives you that extra body on board that if they don't clear it, you're going to have even more follow up. And this deck's entire thesis essentially is you break my board, okay, I will remake the exact same board the next turn, and you're not going to be able to deal with the crackback.
Yeah, the entire grave becomes a second hand, which is really nice in this deck, and the amount of grind that you can get out of this is nuts. And so that's the first thing that really drove me to want to play the deck too, because I noticed that in playing Striker, you're just sitting on one monster in back row. And so it's kind of the same thing. You just sit on one monster with back row. And so you'll see in my list, I kind of took a Striker approach to it. And so it's pretty interesting the way that I went about it. We will see Eva's list as well. This is definitely something that I wanted to cover though, because of the fact that the deck itself has so many different ways that you can go ahead and get to your link for as well. We play Splash Mage, we play Anemone. Anemone also is something that will allow you to recur another piece as well. So just as much recursion and as much grind as you could want in one deck as possible. That's why I think this deck still has a lot of viability in the current format, because if you can play a ton of hand traps, you can keep an entire hand with a second hand engrave. It does work out pretty well.
Absolutely. And Bubble Reef is a card that it used to be kind of the boss monster of the deck and the main thing that you'd go into. I think we see Argonaut more so now, but she still has a place because of her that Deco Tucker Heat Soul ability to draw a card and the fact that she gets big.
Yes.
I mean, after one banished monster, if you have Battle Ocean up and you have all these cards equipped, she's 5200. So just gets massive.
Yeah, definitely a very solid card here. And again, with an enemy, when you have an enemy attached to your monster like an Argonaut, because of the Battle Ocean, when it does go to the grave, it does count as a recursion. So that's another thing that's really nice. If they do out your monster, it does not matter. You are still adding back advantage. So that's why I like it a lot.
Right. One of my favorite things in the deck is playing Forbidden Droplet in the deck and being able to get 2 hits off of wave basically in it, where you'd use wave and then you negate the monster and then you droplet for like another monster effect they try to use, and you send your anemone and then anemone adds back your wave, and then you can negate something else.
Oh, it's so good too. Yeah,
It's
there's
pretty
just
cool too.
so many good interactions in the deck, and I feel like this is something that a lot of people see this and they're like, "Oh, it's not that good." But in my opinion, I think this is just a deck that is really underrated, and this is something that you should really try.
Absolutely.
So, talking more so about utility, I talk about utility a lot, and it really depends on what deck I'm talking about. But if a deck has really solid utility, especially built in, I'm all game. Because this is something where if you have something like the Sleeping Maiden, even, this card at first glance might not be that crazy. But in the off chance that you can't get to Battle Ocean, you can banish this from your grave and then target a link in your grave and attach it to a link on your board. And so that gives you the Argonaut effect to be able to negate because it needs to have something equipped to it. And then you also have Spring Girl here, who is a free extension to the board just by banishing one in your grave, being able to special out a free 4 for cards like Dweller or Bahamut. And then you also have the burn damage on this card as well. So there's just a lot of really cool options in this deck.
Absolutely. There are so many times where you get stopped on Sea Angel trying to grab Battle Ocean. And this is why almost in a lot of cases, I tend to send, when I normal summon Blue Tang, I tend to send Sleepy Maiden just because I'm expecting an Ash or an Imperm on the Sea Angel. And so if I send Sleepy Maiden down, then I can still get out the Aqua Argonaut with the spell and trap negate, which might be huge in a certain matchup. Because a lot of times people are going to want to negate that, and it can be a big problem if you don't have the Sleeping Maiden and you're not able to attach that Link monster to the Argonaut for the negate.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And this is a card that, even at first glance for me, I was like, oh, this card really doesn't do enough. And then I read Argonaut and I read this and I was like, ah, gotcha. So
Right.
it's definitely a nice piece of support for the deck. And then again, Springle being that free level 4, it's super important, especially right now for Dweller. Dweller is the name of the game. That card is
Yes,
nuts. So, and then it
absolutely.
always gets boosted too, right? So that's really cool.
Right. And the thing with also sending the Sleepy Maiden is that because in your build, there's basically no build that's going to play more than one Sleepy Maiden, but in a lot of your other builds, you're going to be playing 3 Seahorse, 3 Spring Girl, probably a couple of Pascals. So it also cuts down on the Marincess card that you might draw off the Blue Tang Excavation, because you're not there's no way you're going to draw a second Sleepy Maiden. But if you send down a Spring Girl, you might draw a second Spring Girl. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it does, that's also a card that can't really be used this turn because you already have one in rotation.
Yeah, and so talking more so about those cards we really want to get access to in the deck, being that wave, being that dive that we've touched on a couple times already in this video, I really do like both of these cards. I think both of these are really insane. Wave alone, being that hand trap, is nuts. The fact that you can just go ahead and use this like a Typhoon if you have a Link 3 or higher Marincess on your board. And this card also makes Link 2 or higher Marincess monsters all currently unaffected by your opponent's card effects, which is equally really insane. Wave has got to be one of the craziest support cards we've seen in a long time.
Wave is, I mean, there's a reason why Coral Triangle is so good and why I think she's basically the best card, like the best card in the extra deck is, Coral Triangle searches Wave. Previous to having Coral Triangle, you had to play 2, maybe 3 Wave in Marincess because you said, okay, this is the whole point of my deck is having Wave. This is kind of my edge over other decks. I have this card that makes my monsters unaffected, but I can't search it, so I have to play it in multiples, and playing it in multiples is really bad going second because most of the time you're not going to be able to make a Link 3 to be able to get this off before your opponent already interrupts you to death. So being able to have this Coral Triangle that searches Wave is crucial to the deck's the playstyle now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And being able to recur so much that you'll always have a discard for the Coral as well, which is really cool. And I really like that too, because Coral in the graveyard kind of insane. If you have nothing on board, like Coral just resets everything. If you want to talk about that too.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, that's kind of the searching wave is the effect that everybody knows. Um, but especially when the new support first came out, um, people did not know that about Coral in the graveyard. So I'd have no monsters on board, and I'd say Coral effect, and they're like, "What do you mean?" And then just summon out the anemone and a sea angel or a slug. And they're like, "What?" They're not ready. They're absolutely not prepared for that. And being that is part of this, the recursion game of the deck is that you will keep being able to, go into your next plays after because it's kind of the harder you combo, the better your follow up is. If you have Coral Triangle in the graveyard, you have Pascals in the graveyard, you have Coral Anemone in rotation, you're gonna have if you use Toad as well. I mean, after you set up your initial board, there's like 4 to 5 different ways of having follow up that your opponent is going to have to stop, or else they are going to lose advantage of the board. And that's what I love about this deck is that it just keeps grinding. It keeps being able to recreate what it made before.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people even today don't know what triangle does because I've been online and I'm like, all right, I'm pretty sure I'm fine. And my opponent's like, nah, you lost. I'm like, nah, activate coral.
No.
And they're just like, what does that do? And I'm like, well, let me tell you. And then you just summon back and forth. They're like, wow, it's a very good card. Very strong.
One of the one of the funniest things is that when you get Nibiru'd after you use like Coral Triangles effect, I've done things where I've dropleted the Nibiru on like I've dropleted the Nibiru onto like somebody else's monster so that my board is clear and then I can banish the Coral Triangle so I can then link into the other link 3 Marbled Rock so I can still have a 4500 unaffected monster um, to keep my wave back online. So
Yeah, that's really nice too. I can see why droplet would be really important for the deck strategy as well. The Marincess dive 2 over here, being able to special summon from deck if you control Battle Ocean as well, we haven't talked about yet. And I think that that's even crazier because there's been a lot of moments where if you have Battle Ocean before the support versus after the support. So before the support, we were really focused on making cards like Crystal Heart and making sure that our monster was a towers. The biggest out for that was just clearing Battle Ocean. But now that Battle Ocean isn't making the monster a towers anymore because we're not using Crystal Heart, a lot of people just deal with the monster and they leave Battle Ocean, which is really interesting. And we see that it happened a bit now where you can still get Battle Ocean back with like Pascal and Grave, but at the same point, I'm seeing a lot more people just dealing with the monster, not Ocean. So if you add back something like Dive, you can go ahead and just special like a blue tank from your deck, and that's really important too. So I think that's a really nice interaction.
right. Crystal is very debatable right now because the fact that it is kind of awkward to do in a lot of your combos. Um, as people will probably see in our builds, I'm still playing it and you aren't, and there's definitely the argument to be made on it, but it's this deck's extra deck has gone through a lot of different evolutions, a lot of different kind of tech cards that have been most popular or best used in the deck. I think Dweller was something that we didn't see as often before, and now it's kind of a mainstay in Marincess decks for a good reason.
Yeah, and I feel like the extra deck is going to be a really interesting thing looking forward, especially for any kind of changes coming up. I know in my build, I actually don't play Toad, and we'll talk about that when we get to the list as well and why that is. But all these brand new cards to the deck, I really do feel like did a number to the point where the deck can still compete and it can still do very well in the format. And I think that's really important just to talk about because it's something that a lot of people just really overlook. A lot of the decks like Marincess. With this deck alone, there's a lot of potential in this format. And then you have to look at any support for water in general in the future and just realize that this is another deck in contention for that, which I think is really cool as well. And so, talking about our last couple cards here, we've been talking about Pascal a little bit. Pascal is a very strong card. If this card is normal or special summon, you can go ahead and special summon a Marincess from your hand, which is already really cool because that's an instant rank 4 if you really want to. But not only that, it's also just a way to get more monsters on the board to just go ahead and extend further. And then also, accept the turn that this was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this and then target Marincess while I trap and then add it back to your hand. So typically through your combo, you want to make sure that you have this in your graveyard. So if your Battle Ocean does get dealt with on the follow up, you can at least add back your Battle Ocean and be able to combo back through.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's very interesting with Pascals because when the support was first announced, people were saying, "Oh, we really don't need Pascals anymore because we have cards that are better extenders and special summon themselves." But I think people very quickly realized that having this card in rotation is huge. Even if you get, impermed on it or something, it's still every level 4 or lower Marincess is still a one card way to wave. Um, so even if Pascal's gets hit, it can still it can still get you somewhere in your combo. And being able to make that instant rank 4 can be huge. If you have a hand that's the sort of god hand is um, Blue Tang, Pascalis, um, Spring Girl, because you're able to make, if you're running Toad in your build, you can immediately make Bahamut into Toad, and then you'll be able to banish with the Spring Girl and kind of go from there with a protected full combo.
Definitely playing two is something that I feel like I cannot go any higher or lower. I think playing two is the perfect number. It's just something that you'll be able to see it, you'll be able to get engraved, you can use as recursion. If you're getting into like the third one, needing it as recursion, maybe you're playing out the deck as a grind way too long and you should be trying to get it back to at least two activations, because anything past that you're probably in a losing position in my eyes. So you really want to make sure that you are controlling the game, but also keeping it at a steady pace of advantage. Because it's very similar to Striker in that aspect, where like you really just want to make sure that you're doing chip damage enough to where when you do go for lethal, that you have it. And so that's something too that I feel like a lot of people, when they pick up the deck, they're playing the hands out for too long. Where you should really be able to try to close the game out at least by like 4 to 5.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a deck that it very much like Striker. You have to be careful with what you do because it doesn't put up a menacing end board a lot of the time. You're putting up a couple of negates, you're putting up a couple of you your board now you're probably going to be putting Dweller on it or something, but it's not something that is the most oppressive end board in the world. It's about kind of being able to win in that grind game and being able to strike just when the moment is right.
Yeah, and I think this deck is definitely able to do so. And I want to just be able to ask real fast too, are there any really important tips or interactions to remember for a lot of people just picking up the deck?
So I think a really important interaction is one, the Coral Triangle Graveyard Effect. One of the most important things I would say is going into Bubble Reef early can be a very scary decision to make. I've done this a couple of times where I haven't thought that a spell and trap negate would be terribly useful against a certain deck, so I've gone into Bubble Reef instead. Um, I would do this against things like Sword Soul, just because they'd usually be able to walk over the Aqua Argonaut when the field spell isn't up, but they would have more trouble walking over the Bubble Reef. So it's something where you want to make sure that you keep that card around because there are times where you need to bring back your banished resources. Another thing with it is that you can, in an absolutely cracked hand, you can make boards that are kind of ridiculous, honestly. A board with Bubble Reef, Aqua Argonaut, and Toad on it. But you have to use your Spring Girl banishes judiciously. So if you banish your Coral Anemone, then you're able to bring it back with Bubble Reef. You're able to have, this Link 2 monster back on the board to be able to extend into link plays you wouldn't have been able to access previously. Um, so with the deck, I think the best tip is just to know that you're not going to immediately win the game. You're not going for an access code play on turn 3 or something, this is a deck where you need to continuously maintain advantage and know when it is the proper moment to take game if your opponent hasn't already scooped.
Yeah, and I would have to say that I agree with that too. And the fact that whenever you play a deck like this, again, I compare this deck very heavily to Striker because I feel like the playstyles are very similar. So this is something where you shouldn't be discouraged if you're not getting lethal immediately. You shouldn't be discouraged if you're going through that grind game. This is another deck where you really have to want the win. This is something where you have no free wins. You really have to set up your board. You have to do the grind game. You have to make sure that you are doing your interactions perfectly. Because that's something where if you slip advantage, a lot of times you can lose. And so this does take a lot of practice. This deck isn't going to be the most linear. There are very linear plays that you can do, but it's not the most linear by definition. There are a couple
Right.
of decks out there, but this is definitely something where I credit it to a lot of time that I've already played, and this is something where the deck can be very rewarding, and that's one thing that I do enjoy about the deck a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a deck where usually your turn 1 combo isn't as complicated as your turn 3 combo because you're trying to remember everything that you're trying to everything that's happening in the graveyard, everything that you can possibly activate that turn. Trying to see if you can push for lethal because your opponent isn't going to be able to interact with you. It's all a very carefully orchestrated dance in the water, if you will. And it's a really enjoyable deck to play. I think most people who pick this up would say the same.
Yeah, and so this is where I just want to ask this question. I know we've already talked about this a little bit, but can this deck still compete?
Yes, I think for this deck to compete in the current meta, it has to either go into a route where it's playing more hand traps, or it's one that has to focus on floodgates. So the goes in match can frequently be um, an instant win against some decks, but not all decks. Um, and there are times when the deck will just be blown out. A good tier hand, even if you make basically the best combo the deck can have, and you have all the recursion in the world on the next turn, tier might just be able to just get you that exact turn. So it's a deck that I think will definitely be rogue. It has problems with breaking boards. It has problems with being able to play when your normal summon gets like banished or shuffled back with, a Kaleido Heart or something. But I think it still has a chance in this because of the amount of utility and the cards it has access to, like Wave, like being able to make easy dwellers, things like that.
And snow is banned, so we don't have to worry about Book of Moon.
Yes, Snow is banned. Also, though, Snow with Bubble Reef is hilarious because I played a game where somebody had Snow and I had Bubble Reef on board, and my Bubble Reef got up to 16,000 attack.
Oh wow,
Yep,
it's pretty good.
pretty good.
I definitely was looking at snow when it got banned, and I was like, all right, Marincess can be played. It's like we
Yeah,
don't get Book of Moon on a normal summon. That's sick. And
exactly. Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of situations where that was a concern, or like back in Despia format, and they'd be like Mirror Jade, would be like like that sucks.
100%. Or just even in sprite format. There are hands where I would basically have all the gas in the world if my normal summon, if I'm able to go into Blue Slug, I'm smooth sailing. I've got all the everything that I need in the world.
Smashers.
Exactly. Exactly. You get hit with smashers and then you're done. And that's why in like a lot of stuff I would be playing cards like Droplet to be able to send, something to the graveyard or being able to play Sign at Crosswipe to tribute my normal summon because then at least um there are three Spring Girl, three Sign at Mining, and three dives, and two dive, and so you still have like a 75% chance of having a card that will be able to either reborn or, getting access to Spring Girl to banish from the grave and be able to continue your play. But if you get your normal summon banished or shuffled back or flip face down,
Yeah.
GG.
And there are a lot of common problems in certain decks like that where there are like very important choke points that if it gets stopped, you're like, all right. But so with this deck alone, though, I feel in this format, especially with the absolute hit that Sprite just took on Ronan, that was ridiculous. That was like, did that really just happen? And so that was interesting to see. I feel like Sprite's still gonna be fairly relevant because of Sprint. It's still gonna be a very good deck, but we're definitely gonna see a lot of tier. And so this will be an interesting format. In my opinion, I do think that the deck can still compete. A lot of you are gonna see my list and be like, "Wow, striker player." But we'll see how that goes. But so there are reasons why you have to have ways in your deck to be able to counteract these situations. If you're worried about your normal summon getting stopped, you need to be able to at least have cards that say, hey, I need a turn or two. So this will be interesting. I hope that you enjoy both the lists coming up here. And this is just ways that we can go ahead and counteract the format, playing a ton of hand traps or certain floodgates because they're still legal. So this is gonna be my list up here. Playing 3 Mind, 3 Demise, 1 Metaverse, 1 Terra. You know how it is. If it's legal, we play it. And so this is something where you can combo and do so much under Mind that it's just kind of nice. Like if you're in the situation where you have like Argonaut and they either deal with your Argonaut, they deal with everything on your board, like your floodgates or what have you, and then you put up Mystic Mind. It's just gonna make it very awkward on your opponent, and it allows for you to have that tempo too, because you can realistically turn off Mind whenever you want. Because you also have the availability at any point to flip Metaverse and activate Battle Ocean or Demise Battle Ocean if you want to like start getting into your plays, which I think is also really cool. I was really debating on putting in like Necro Valley. That does hurt your own deck, but if you're playing against like tier limit and you set up like Bubble Reef, it's kind of nice. Even like setting up like Argonaut with a equip and having like Necro Valley, I feel like tier just doesn't play the game. And so that's another thing too, where if you play like one Necro Valley just with the Demise and with the Metaverse, I think that has so much to say about what it can do in the new format as well. Because either you're stunning or you're putting up like rivalry, or you'll have the Necro Valley, and then you still have a lot of your own plays. Like I play 2 Pascal, I play 3 of the Tang, play 3 of the Seahorse, 3 Spring Girl, and then 1 of the Sleepy Maiden. So you have enough gas. You're also maining the Ashes, the Crows, the Imperms. I don't really love Ash right now, but I think that it's pretty important with Havness around, where if you go like normal summon or into Sea Angel and they reveal Havness, you want to be able to at least shut that off immediately because you don't want them to be able to play on your turn because that's even more scary, getting more gas. And that's something that you really want to avoid. In the side, I am siding the artifact package because I feel like, again, if you are setting up your board, you just want to make sure that this is a very quick shutout of a game if you can. It's still going to be a grind, but having cards like Scythe really do speed up that process. Mystic Mind, Scythe, you know, cards that were missed. But also going second, siding in that Gamma, very important. I do have Super Poly as well. Being able to break a board is also just very important as well. Lightning Storm to deal with cards like Smashers because you don't want your normal summon getting interrupted. So there's a lot of different lines in here. I don't play Toad. I think that Toad's really cool, but I really just wanted to focus on like building a board, like going up to the Link 4, and then if it gets broke, relying on Mind for like a turn, and then going back into my Link 4 and not really trying to expend resources in other places. It is really nice, like you said earlier, about the line where you can like open up Bahamut immediately, detach, and then go into like Spring Girl plays and have like an entire protected combo. Definitely nice as well. I always just try to focus on building my board and then rebuilding my board. For me, I've always really liked that as an option more than just like putting up any kind of like negation for the most part in this kind of a deck.
Yeah, I think this deck definitely will have some change and stuff once Darkwing Blast comes out. I can absolutely see, I mean, if Tier is going to be the best deck, playing a deck that is focused on and can play and combo under mine is huge, especially if there are multiple ways to be able to access mine and being able to use the metaverse to um, basically just bring out the Battle Ocean. I can absolutely see why this build would be so useful for this deck. A lot of the side deck and such is a lot more focused on the board breakers, and I have never seen Super Poly used in a Marincess deck, because I think a lot of the fear that we as Marincess players will have is, Oh, or at least, the thing that gives me pause is like, oh, I'm not able to use my coral triangle that turn because I summoned the Garura. But the thing is, if you're going second and you're not and you don't really have anything but this super poly in hand, you weren't going to be able to get to the coral triangle without it anyway.
Yeah, I was about to say too is the fact that like you can change the Garura and play the Mud Dragon as well. And the reason why I like Super Poly a lot though is a similar reason to what we talked about earlier, is that you can go Super Poly, discard something, summon even like a Mud Dragon, your whole board's untargetable, and then you also have a card engraved, so you can activate your Spring Girl immediately and like start comboing that way as well. So there's a lot of different ways that you can utilize Super Poly in this deck to really be effective. I just choose Garura. I know that it might be a little less good there, but at the same point, you have cards like Area that you can summon anyway because it needs a water. You don't need like two
Right.
waters, which is most of the extra deck. So that's something that I really like as well because Area does come up in most matchups, especially because there's water now in a lot of matchups. So with this alone, you get that free draw, which is always going to be very important. Guru is also just a lot of free damage. I like that card a lot, being able to clear off the elf and the red, the elf and the carrot, get rid of the toad that's still played now with the frog. We'll have to see exactly how the build ends up being. But there's also just like the builds with the IP and whatnot that you want to be able to clear as well. So I feel like Super Poly in this deck is very versatile, and whether it be the Garura or the Mud Dragon, I feel like both are very important options when you're going second to be able to crack almost any board at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like this. I honestly really like this list. I think this has a lot of teeth for this upcoming format.
Yeah, Mystic Mind kind of crazy.
Mine
So
kind of crazy.
still kind of good. So we're going to go ahead and look at your list now if you want to go ahead and give some explanation behind the list.
Yeah, so this is kind of a more, I know, classic Marincess list where you're playing a lot of hand traps and you're kind of focused on your opponent having a soft enough board for you to be able to establish. So I'm playing, similar ratios in terms of the Marincess monsters: three Tang, three Seahorse, three Spring Girl, two Pascals, one Sleeping Maiden. I'm also playing one Mandarin, just because it's the worst level 4 or lower Marincess name that you play in the deck. There are worse ones, like the level 2, which is just useless, so you never play that one. But because any one Marincess is a small combo in itself, I found uses for it, and it does come up where you need just a little bit of something else to extend that doesn't necessarily have to be in your hand. Also being a great pitch off of your Signet Mining. I play one Silent Sea Nettle, so I was playing two of this in builds before, but I just needed to make more space for hand traps, and basically I took out a copy of it for Signet Crosswipe, just as an out to mine. And this card is it's really good for your grind game. Um, and it's a level 4 that doesn't activate to special summon itself, which can come up in some matchups to be able to get this extra body on board without having to deal with like negation and such. Um, so then I'm playing 3 Ash. Just as we mentioned, it's still very generic, has its applications. The 3 Crow because tier. um, then the 3 Veiler, 3 Imperm, and 3 Nib for the tier matchup as well, because I think this will probably change once Darkwing Blast hits because of Lulu, because of them having a second answer to Nibiru that isn't just having an Appaloosa on board. So being able to have Lulu on board weakens Nibiru, and so it would definitely need to have another look at it.
Lulu also
Um,
kind of crazy.
Lulu crazy. Oh my god, yeah,
Yeah.
that card is really good. It's also a card that you can steal with area, which I've done a
Yep.
couple of times. It's weird. It's very funny though. Um, you're just like, okay, I'll just take a solemn, I guess. Um, and then, the 3 mining for consistency, 1 battle ocean, 2 dive. This is standard ratio at this point. 2 desires. There are times where you might banish your wave or you might banish your battle ocean. But having those extra 2 cards in hand, usually, a couple of hand traps or something, can be really crucial for some matchups.
Oh, we were always drawn to.
We're always drawn to, absolutely. But we're always playing three desires if we could help it, right?
Yeah, if we can
Right?
help it, if it goes to three, we play it at three. It's we are drawing two cards.
100%. Um, yeah, and then the one wave because it's a card that doesn't really help you going second, but it's kind of the key to the deck. Yeah, and then in the extra deck, I am playing still the Crystal Heart to be able to make the monster unaffected so I don't get hit with Super Poly because I'm playing Toad in this build. It came up a lot that when I wasn't using Crystal Heart, I would just be getting Super Polyed with, Argonaut and Toad before I could even get, Wave off. And then it's like, okay, I guess I'm relying on hand traps for this turn. Um, and then I had taken out the Wonder Heart, which I had been playing in this build for quite a while, in favor of Dweller, just because Dweller is so much more impactful in this meta. And then kind of a very standard side deck. You have the three droplet, which I mentioned has a lot of very interesting applications and interactions in this deck. The Twisters, which also is that nice discard and is good against back row, flu, Exosister, which I think are going to be problems. Runic as well to be able to out the field spell. Um, the anti spells, the evenlies, and goes in just kind of go in a lot of these different lists. So yeah.
Yeah, floodgates are really cool, especially when you can side or main them. It's definitely cool too because I know that a lot of people are like Keck W floodgate, but at the same point, it's like whenever you're able to play a card like that and it doesn't hinder you at all, it's so crazy because if you can combo underneath them, like even playing Striker and playing like their Chameleon one and not caring that you're locked into one machine, it's just so wild because if you play against like Salad and then you just watch your opponent scoop, you're like, wow, this card's insane. So for me, it's really nice to have that option in the sideboard at least.
Right. And actually in this I had put Rivalry of the Warlords because I had been uh messing around with Rivalry lately. Because it just hits tier better.
Yeah.
Because usually like if you have Gozen up, um like whereas Gozen doesn't hurt you at all, Rivalry can be a bit awkward if you have Dweller or you have Toad on the field, but usually those cards are either, you know, if you already use the effect of Dweller, you can get rid of it if you think Rivalry is just going to be able to absolutely destroy your opponent. And it's better against tier because a lot of times they can just put up a bunch of dark monsters and be able to still, crack a board or things like that. Not necessarily crack a board, but be able to out yours. So I think it's kind of a question between Rivalry and Gozen at this point.
Yeah, both very strong. And
Mhm.
so I definitely like the list too. Just looking at the extra deck, it's always really interesting to see because it's pretty standard across the board as far as many options in the extra deck, but there's always going to be a couple changes that are going to be very different from one to the next. And so even looking at like the main deck, Nibiru unfortunately just we had so much hope, right? There was gigantic, and we're like, yeah, it's not that bad. We still run Nibiru, it's still gonna be really impactful. And now we're like, there's Lulu too, so it's just like we were trying, but I think moving forward, it probably will end up in some capacity still getting played. I would imagine somebody's gonna be like, yeah, we can still play it, and I'm sure that's probably true. It's probably just gonna be like, it's not that bad, but at the same point right now, dealing with Gigantic and Lulu now, and the fact that Lulu comes back, it's kind of hard to want to play Nibiru at this point. There are a ton of hand traps though. Me and my friend just went over every single hand trap in the game, and I'm pretty sure there's like 18, 19, which sounds like a lot. I did not even know there's that many hand traps in this game. That's crazy. But even looking at cards like Droll right now, that's a card that's going to be nuts this format, especially against tier. All the different danger draws and the different ads that are happening, that's a card that you could consider playing this because I think that's going to be a really nice substitution for this format. And we all know when Droll is good, Droll is insane. That
Yes.
card's literally turn ending. It's nuts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree on Nibiru. This is a build I've been playing for the current format and such. But once Darkwing Blast comes out, I think Nibiru goes back to the side. You know, early in the Power of the Elements format, it was already in the side.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of got to go back there because it's, you know, that's you're able to play quite a few hand traps in this. I mean, you can see in this list, but it's still the if you draw Nibiru plus Veiler or Imperm, that's great. But if you're just drawing Nibiru against a lot of these decks, you're not going to be able to do much. Where a card like DD Crow is going to be more impactful because it's actually going to resolve a lot of the time.
Yeah, and that's why in a lot of my list I've actually been playing like Bell too, because even the Bysted cards, like they target for cost. So you
Yep.
can still Bell it. So that's something where using Bell against even the crows in the format is really important, especially in a deck like this where you want cards in your graveyard. But of course you don't really have to worry about like the Bysted cards, you still have to worry about Crow. And that's another thing
Right.
too about why I really like this deck is because it's a really nice tech option when everyone's on Bysted cards and they can't banish anything from your graveyard because they're all water. So that's another really cool point.
Exactly. Yeah, if everyone's trying to use these cards to be able to banish tier cards, if you're playing a deck that is not playing light or dark monsters, you're going to be smooth sailing and not have to worry about, you know, having a large DD Crow that also searches during the end phase. So,
Yeah, you just force your opponent to have to banish their own cards. That seems kind of rough. But I hope that everyone enjoyed this video today. I just want to thank you again for joining me on the complete guide to Marincess. I like this deck a lot. I think it's really cool. And again, it's one of those decks that did just get mass reprinted. So if you do want to check out the deck, I highly recommend doing so.
100%. And if you ever want Marincess tips or want to talk about the deck, I'm sure that both of us would be more than thrilled to talk with you about it.
I will leave the link to Eva's stream down in the description below as well if you want to go ahead and check that out. I do again appreciate you for joining me today. Do you have any last thoughts on the video, on the deck itself?
It'll be interesting when we get World Ocean Dragons Atlantis, because that's still a water baby.
That card's nuts. I read that, I was like, all right, like this should be fun. And so
Yep.
somebody brought it up too. Is like they're gonna be playing that in like combo decks because you can like reset Baron, and
Yep.
that's kind of nuts. So we'll see how that goes. If you haven't already joined my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and if you want a coaching session over at Metafy, it's all down in the description below. I hope that everyone has a wonderful day. We'll catch you all in the next video. Thanks.